Hi everyone and welcome to the 29th Daily Critique, where today I'm going to be discussing 4 images by Kyle Goetsch, and incidentally I have no idea if that's how you say his surname, so sorry if I got that wrong, Kyle. But he's given us 4 images from the Cape area of South Africa, so they're all coastal shots. And whilst Kyle thought that his processing maybe needed some work, I actually think his processing's pretty great. And what we're going to discuss instead is just some of the considerations around crops and distractions. So we're going to go through his images and just think about where we might want the edges of the frame to lie, given some of the compromises that we might have to make. And aside from that, of course, we're going to do a general critique as well. So let's get started. Right, so here are Kyle's images. Really, really nice set. These, I don't do much coastal photography myself, in part because I don't want to be contending with the waves and all that entails. But it's really great to see a set like this. It's certainly a genre of photography that I can appreciate, and we'll go through them in Photoshop first, starting with this one because I would do the least to this one, or have the least to say about it, because it's executed really well. You could make an argument that the horizon here is perhaps a little central. Let's just make this brush size a bit smaller. It more or less splits the image in half. I don't know how much of a problem that is. It didn't really occur to me on first glance, but if it were a problem, you could probably just lose a portion of the cloud off the top there, and that might get a slightly stronger balance between the foreground and the sky, or just slightly pan down. But I can understand the enthusiasm for including as much of this sky as possible, because it's a pretty wonderful, dramatic sky. And I think this is Cochel Bay, which I think we edited a photo from here previously from a different Cape Town photographer. But like the editing, the shutter speed choice is really good. You've got a nice sense of motion in the waves here, but it's softened enough by the long exposure that it's not a distracting texture. And I love the rich colour in these boulders too. I actually think that's really beautiful. And although this left-hand corner is quite heavy, I don't actually feel any sense of imbalance, funnily enough. I think traditionally I would be saying that this needs to be, a bit more resigned to the edge of the frame, so that this edge sort of sits on the edge of the frame. But I just don't feel that for whatever reason looking at this, and maybe that's because these rocks have such nice colour and structure. It would be good if this highlight wasn't quite so bright. It's pretty much white there. Very difficult to resolve that kind of issue though, because I guess the sun's coming down, well, either here or over here. So that area of sky is that much brighter. You have that strong contrast, and so I'm not sure that you can really resolve that. Though maybe with some very clever masking you could. Okay, so onto this one, which is the first one where we're going to talk about cropping and how you might think about cropping. This is also the only one that I've really had a meaningful re-edit of, because I think looking at it initially it's a little bit muddy, a little bit warm. It doesn't quite feel fresh enough to me, and in the next video actually I'm going to discuss white balance a bit more, but maybe the white balance here is a little bit too warm. And I can understand why you might choose to do that, because you can make more of the lighthouse here. And incidentally, I think I've actually just plugged in a corrected version, because Kyle, I think your original had the lighthouse stretched by the wide angle distortion, so it was off at an angle, and I've just straightened it there for you, which I think you essentially have to do with this particular image, or it just looks a little odd. But another really nice shot, and let's have a look at the original, or my edit of the original. So you can see it's a lot bluer and fresher. In fact, looking at the two side by side now, I wonder if there's a happy medium between the two, because this now suddenly feels very cold. And maybe I should have made more of those warm colours, but I'm just doing these edits rather quickly. So the crop is interesting because we've lost all of those foreground rocks. So if we look at the things that Kyle has obviously decided are a distraction, let me just create a new layer here. We've got this rock on the left-hand side here. I've got my brush so small I can barely see it myself. There we go. Got this rock on the left-hand side. So that's a slight distraction creeping into the frame, maybe not a big problem. And then Kyle's decided, as a more broad creative choice, to roughly frame like this to eliminate all of the foreground rocks. Now, I actually prefer it with those rocks in the foreground. I actually think these rocks are quite attractive. There's nice colour. I mean, this little bit of foam here is not ideal, but actually doesn't really bother me either. But the way they're cracked, and they've got nice round shapes, but also beautiful colour, reds and oranges and yellows. I think that's really nice. And this rock creeping in on the edge of the frame, okay, you could say it's a distraction because it's coming from the edge of the frame, but I don't see it that way. I think it's sort of pointing almost towards the lighthouse. It kind of helps to counterbalance the lighthouse as well, and I don't find it at all annoying. So actually my personal inclination here is to stick with the wider view. But those are the various cropping considerations you might make. So losing the left edge there to lose this little crag, crop in from the bottom here to lose these rocks, and crop in from the right to lose the rock on the right hand side. And then I would potentially consider cropping from the top here just to reduce the amount of sky, which is one crop I probably would do. Because I think that makes for a slightly more focused composition. You could even look at a 16:9 crop actually. I've just got that dialed in at the moment. That's too tight actually, but you get the idea. Lose a bit of that sky at the top and maybe just keep all of this foreground, because otherwise it feels a little bit crammed in. That 16:9 crop felt a little too tight. So that would be how I would approach editing that image myself, but maybe I took a little bit too much of those warm colors away. Let's do this one now. I mean, this is the best image of the set in my opinion. I mean, you just have this wonderful atmosphere that comes from the sea spray and the light. Really evocative shot. There's very little that I don't like about it. I particularly like the way the editing has been handled here, because I think there'd be a temptation, I mean, even if you do watch some of my own videos, to say, well, the highlights are blown, and so what you need to do is exposure bracket and try and get as much detail back into this as possible. I think this rendering is far better than trying to recover those highlights. There are some scenarios when you're shooting into the light when actually you don't want to recover the highlights, but what you do want is a really beautiful highlight roll-off. So you can see how there's no hard edges in here, has a lovely soft airy feel. And the colour palette is just beautiful too, really harmonious, warm colours, not too much saturation anywhere, really well handled. The only exception to that, I would just say that this water at the bottom, I'm sure it's naturally yellow like this, but it just looks a bit dirty. It almost looks like sewer water, and so my inclination there is to just take a bit of that yellow out of the water, and that will help the color palette fit together a bit better as well. So I have had a play with an edit here. I think I prefer Kyle's, but mostly I just wanted to show the wider view so that I could show Kyle's crop, because he has lost some of the left edge and lost some of the bottom edge. Now, looking at the bottom, I mean, it's easy to understand why, because this scum at the bottom here is just not attractive. I think you can even see bits of microplastic floating on top of it. So yeah, that's not the kind of thing I want in my photos either. So good choice getting rid of that. So we'll lose that, and then I can understand why you would then choose to use the left hand side there, or lose it, because this mass just feels a bit substantial, and if you start to lose just a small portion of it, just this sliver on the left, then suddenly it becomes really nicely balanced and symmetrical. You can see this lovely V coming through here. So if you make it symmetrical around this line here, I do think that improves the composition. So very much approve of your crop there, Kyle, and particularly your edit. I think that's just a fabulous image. Okay, and then on to the final shot. This is probably the weakest of the bunch, to be honest, so maybe I should have done this one first. I mean, I guess a lot of people are going to love this because you've got lovely wave motion. The sun is beautifully rendered. I mean, the edit's actually very good. The specular highlights on the water here are really beautiful, lovely rich oranges, and a really nice transition through the oranges. There's no ugly clipping or anything like that, and it's great the way that that all ties through to the sun there. Let's shrink this brush down. There's a nice curved shape here, which works well too, and that combined with these diagonal lines, I think works really beautifully, and the sun is nicely positioned too. So in those respects, it ties together really well. But I have to say, looking at it myself, whilst I can appreciate all of those aspects, I do see lots of photos, and so I'm looking for that extra bit of cleverness or beauty or originality or whatever it might be. This shot is a great example of just that. But this doesn't quite do it for me in that respect, particularly given that this curve is just too close to the edge of the frame, and then you've got this little distraction creeping in, which is black, and it really does catch my eye, and that sort of thing just annoys me when I have this really lovely simple shot. And we'll talk about the cropping, because I don't think Kyle had a nice solution here, because look what he's cropped out. I mean, that massive rock on the left surely has to go. So I can't blame Kyle for just putting the edge of the frame down there, and then you've got this little promontory still coming into the edge of the frame. Well, you can try and get rid of that if you want, but guess what? You lose the edge of your curve there. So I mean, how can you decide on the best compromise there? Very, very difficult, because I think if you lose that curve, you lose a lot of the charm of the image, and in fact, I suspect you lose what excited Kyle about this image in the first place. Yeah, that's an interesting shot to discuss cropping. And actually, on the subject of cropping, regularly with skies, when I have these hot spots creeping through, but I've got more continuous cloud below, I like to put the top edge of the frame right on the bottom edge of where the sort of the clear sky shines through, and you get that sense of more continuous cloud and a bit more atmosphere, the idea that there's just a gap on the horizon, that sort of thing. And I prefer that simplicity. I don't particularly want contrast in the top of the frame in a sky quite like this. So that would be worth considering, although in this case maybe it all becomes a bit narrow. Yeah, it could work like that. But so close to being a really wonderful shot, that, because the foreground is essentially spectacular, but the this area on the left, it just it stresses me out. But I'm just one of those people, I'm afraid. So thank you very much for sending those in, Kyle. Really enjoyed editing them, and certainly helpful to talk about cropping like that. I think I've got another 4 or 5 people ready to go yet. So Stuart, Henry, Alistair, Renee and Richard are coming up next, but if you'd like to take part, then do send me your images.